Hey guys, so I thought you might find it interesting as I did this particular chapter in Peter Schweitzer's book Secret Empires. Uh, it's has to do with Biden's in the Ukraine, and given what's been plastered all over the news, or at least I don't know what they're saying on the mainstream news these days. I don't watch it anymore, but I know it's all over the internet. What's going on in Ukraine business of late. So for those of you who either don't have this book or who don't care to read the entire book and just want to hear this appropriate chapter, I thought I would read it for everybody. I do not know how to do the audio and the visual thing, so forgive me for the black screen the entire time. I don't know how to show images and all of that while I'm reading, so it's just, darken your phone, stick it in your pocket, and just listen, because this is just going to be an audio of this chapter. So, Chapter 4, Biden's in Ukraine, again from Peter Schweitzer's Secret Empires. Chapter notes say, while Vice President Biden was overseeing U.S. policy toward Ukraine, his son joined the board of one of Ukraine's most profitable and corrupt energy companies. Second bullet, the Bidens would be potential billionaires as a result of the deal. And thirdly, did Joe Biden look the other way when 1.8 billion, that's a B, in taxpayer money disappeared? So this begins the chapter. Half a world away, the father statesmen Biden and Kerry were also deeply involved in a complex and difficult situation in Ukraine. The country was facing Russian aggression in the east, political turbulence at home, and powerful oligarchs fighting over the country's resources. In the middle of it, Kerry and Biden were making critical decisions about Ukraine's future, with Hunter Biden and Devon Archer on their heels. Hunter Biden is Joe Biden's son. Devon Archer is best friends with Christopher Hines of the Hines family, who was John Kerry's son-in-law. Ukraine is blessed with a treasure house of energy resources, particularly oil and natural gas. These riches are a target for Russian covert operations, corrupt oligarchs, and powerful mafia dons who all sought to control them. Burisma is a secretive Ukrainian natural gas company with deep political ties in the country, and the nation's second largest private natural gas producer. Many of Burisma's assets are heavily concentrated in the contentious eastern reaches of the country. This border area with Russia has been the source of conflict with Moscow for decades. Burisma was created in 2006 with a Cypriot registration by Mykola Zlochevsky. You guys are going to have to forgive me. I'm going to butcher these Ukrainian Russian names. I'll do my best, but the only Russian I know is the dirty words I was taught by exchange students during my lifeguarding days in my 20s, and I won't repeat those for those of you who will know what they mean, but it's those of you I'm talking about. Forgive me butchering these names. The barrel-chested, bald-headed, and future ecology and natural resources minister under the pro-Russian government of Viktor Yanukovych. How did a government minister end up owning a massive energy company? In a story far too familiar in that part of the world, Zlochevsky gave himself the license to develop the abundant gas fields. Of note, he took the license for the country's largest natural gas field, Sakhalinska, from someone else and gave it to a company connected to Burisma. To complete the portrait, Zlochevsky had a reputation for lavishness while in government service, with a taste for Bentleys and the occasional Rolls-Royce. His other business ventures also reflect his reputed lifestyle. He owns a super exclusive fashion boutique in downtown Kiev named Zloki, or Zlochi, I don't know how you pronounce that, with chandeliers, marble-topped tables, and recessive interactive panels. Zloki sells accessories made of alligator, ostrich, eel, and lizard. At Zloki, a set of matching crocodile dress shoes and belt will set you back $2,800. The average Ukrainian would have to spend nearly 9 months' wages to pay for it. In 2012, President Yanukovych removed Zlochevsky as Ecology and Natural Resources Minister and appointed him to the National Security and Defense Council. But fortunately, a year earlier, the ownership structure of Burisma had been quietly transferred to a Cyprus-based company called Procidi Investments. The island nation has become a favored venue for Russian activities where oligarchs, mafia, government officials, and intelligence operatives park their assets because of the very tight secrecy laws. Zlokevsky's name was still attached to the company, but Burisma's major subsidiaries now listed the same business address as the natural gas firm controlled by the controversial Ukrainian oligarch named Ihor Kolomoisky. The UK's Guardian newspaper in 2015 reported Kolomoisky to be perhaps Ukraine's, quote, most troubling oligarch of all, end quote. For a country rife with corruption, war, self-dealing, and cronyism, that is saying something. But he would prove to be a worthy business partner for Joe Biden's son and John Kerry's inner circle. Pudgy with a thick crop of silver hair, wire-frame glasses, and a tight beard, Kolomoisky, there's actually a picture of this character in here. Maybe I'll show you guys this picture of him. Where is he? There he is. So that's him right there. Kolomoisky was born into a family of engineers from the eastern half of Ukraine. His power base was Dnipropetrovsk. Sorry, butchering that one. Since May 2016, Dnipro, an industrial center in the country that has been a cradle to a succession of power Ukrainian figures. Dnipro is known as the stomping ground of ex-presidents Leonid Kuchma and Oleksandr Turkhinov, as well as oligarchs like Viktor Pinchuk. Before the breakup of the Soviet Union, the area was the powerful base for Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev. Through his company, the Privat Group, Kolomoisky controlled Ukraine's largest financial institution, Privat Bank, through which the Ukrainian military got paid and government pensions were distributed. He also controlled media companies and airlines. Sometimes known as King Kolomoisky, inside the country, his office features a gigantic shark tank, but he does most of his business from his luxurious home in Switzerland. Kolomoisky does not seem to care much for the rules. He holds Ukrainian, Israeli, and Cypriot passports, which is a problem because the Ukrainian constitution forbids dual citizenship. When asked about that fact, Kolomoisky quipped, quote, "The Constitution prohibits double citizenship, not triple citizenship but triple citizenship is not forbidden," end quote. Kolomoisky reported violent and brutal business practices. His reported violent and brutal business practices stand out even in this rough corner of the globe. A British judge upbraided the billionaire for taking control of a company in Ukraine, quote-unquote, at gunpoint. Rival oligarchs have sued him in British courts, alleging that he was involved in murders and beatings. In relation to a prior business deal, Kolomoisky allegedly used, quote, quasi-military teams, end quote, to sent, quote, hired rowdies armed with baseball bats, iron bars, gas and rubber bullet pistols, and chainsaws, end quote, to take over the Kremeshuk steel plant in 2006. He also used, quote, a mix of phony court orders, often involving corrupt judges and registers, and strong-arm tactics, end quote, to purge rival board members. Kolomoisky vigorously denies any illegal activities. Why young Biden and those close to Kerry viewed Kolomoisky as an appropriate business partner is not known. Repeated calls and emails to both about their work with Burisma went unanswered. Kolomoisky built his multi-billion-dollar empire by, quote-unquote, raiding other companies, a violent Ukrainian form of mergers and acquisitions involving guns. Matthew Rojansky, director of the Keenan Institute at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, has done an in-depth study of the practice. Quote, "There are actual firms in Ukraine registered with offices and business cards, firms that specialize in various dimensions of the corporate rating process, which includes armed guys to do stuff, forging documents, bribing notaries, bribing judges, end quote. Although the practice is common, Kolomoisky stands out. Rojansky calls him, quote, the most famous oligarch raider accused of having conducted a massive raiding campaign over the roughly 10 years up to 2010, end quote. Given all this, it should come as no surprise that Kolomoisky's business practices have long received the attention of U.S. law enforcement officials. Because of his activities, he was eventually placed on a U.S. government visa ban list, prohibiting him from entering the country legally. As we will see, he will be taken off that list shortly after Hunter Biden and Devon Archer joined the board of his energy company. It is important to understand the events in Ukraine that were unfolding as Biden and Archer, who was on the board of the Heinz family office, joined Burisma. It may also explain why they were invited to join. In February 2014, a series of protests and strikes across western Ukraine culminated in a political revolution. President Yanukovych was chased out of office, implicated in both rampant corruption and shameless brutality. He was also very cozy with the Kremlin. He eventually exiled to Moscow. The wave of protests brought into power a coalition government that was nationalist and determined to loosen the country's ties to Russia. Vladimir Putin, sensing an opportunity, pushed Russian military forces into the Crimean Peninsula and then the easternmost region of Ukraine. He also armed pro-Russian militias with eastern Ukraine who savagely fought the new Ukrainian government. Crimea is a strategic peninsula that offers a warm water port into the Black Sea and has long been a sought-after Russian prize. The Ukrainian government responded by mobilizing the army. There was vicious fighting in the eastern region of the country, including Dnipropetrovsk. Burisma has many of its energy assets in the area. Kolomoisky was appointed governor of Dnipropetrovsk. Never one to leave his sentiments unknown, Kolomoisky offered a $10,000 bounty for each Russian quote-unquote saboteur caught by the public. Putin called the billionaire a, quote, unique imposter, end quote. Kolomoisky fired back, calling the Russian president, quote, a schizophrenic short in stature, end quote. The international community rightfully reacted to Putin's move with shock and anger. The response from Washington was almost immediate, and for Biden and Archer, there was again the opportunity to strike deals in the wake of the Vice President and Secretary of State's official duties. This book was written in 2018, by the way, which is when I read it. In early March, only days after the Russian move into Crimea, Secretary of State John Kerry visited Kiev, arriving with a pledge of $1 billion in American loan guarantees and offers of technical assistance. He also announced clear-cut American political and moral support for Ukraine. As he walked along, I'm going to butcher this one, Instituska Street in the heart of Kiev, a Ukrainian woman beseeched him, quote, we hope Russian troops will leave Crimea and we hope for your assistance, end quote. Quote, we are trying very hard, end quote, Kerry responded. Kerry spoke forcefully about the U.S. commitment to an independent Ukraine, but it was Vice President Biden who would end up being the point person in the Obama administration's policy toward Ukraine. Quote, no one in the U.S. government has wielded more power over Ukraine than Vice President Joe Biden, end quote, noted Foreign Policy magazine. Indeed, his power as it relates to Ukrainian policy extended far beyond just Washington. He was, quote, considered the voice of the country's Western backers, end quote. Biden consulted regularly with the Ukrainian president by telephone and made 5 trips to the Ukraine between 2014 and 2017. He did so at the time that his son and his son's business partners prepared to strike a profitable deal with controversial and reportedly violent oligarchs Kolomoisky and Zlochevsky, who would benefit from his actions. On April 16, 2014, Devon Archer made a private visit to the White House for a meeting with Vice President Biden. We do not know the duration because, according to White House records, the meeting lasted until 11:59 p.m. The end of date placeholder when the meeting's end was not recorded. Less than a week later, on April 22nd, there was a public announcement that Devon Archer had been asked to join the board of Burisma. 3 weeks after that, on May 13th, it was announced that Hunter Biden would join too. Neither Biden nor Archer had any background or experience in the energy sector. That's important to note. As was the case with their deals in China, the foreign company Burisma here did not hide the fact that the son of the vice president and the financial manager for the family of the American Secretary of State were joining the board. Far from it. They mentioned it in the first paragraph of their press release as translated, quote, Devon Archer is an iconic figure in American politics today. According to U.S. media, he is the part of the Family Foundation Directorship Heinz Family Office with Christopher Heinz, like as in the ketchup, John Kerry's stepson, the current U.S. Secretary of State. He has served as senior advisor to John Kerry and in 2004 during the presidential campaign. Today, he is the co-founder and managing director of Rosemont Seneca Partners, where his partner is Hunter Biden, the son of the current U.S. Vice President Joe Biden, end quote. The timing of the announcement is significant. The day before Archer's appointment on April 21st, Vice President Joe Biden landed in Kiev for a series of high-level meetings with Ukrainian officials. The vice president was bringing with him highly welcome terms of a United States Agency for International Development, USAID, program to assist the Ukrainian natural gas industry and promises of more U.S. financial assistance and loans. Soon, the United States and the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, would be pumping more than $1 billion, that's with a B, into the Ukrainian economy. The younger Biden, for his part, tried to put the best possible face on the deal. He claimed that by joining the board of the scandal-laden natural gas producer, he would, quote, contribute to the economy and benefit the people of Ukraine, end quote. Biden also said that his role would be, quote, consulting the company on matters of transparency, corporate governance and responsibility, international expansion, and other priorities, end quote. His responsibilities also included providing, quote, support for the company among international organizations, end quote. At other times, they would describe his role as offering strategic guidance to Burisma, quote unquote. Biden and Archer's appointment to the Burisma board did not go unnoticed in China, where Rosemont Seneca enjoyed continuing progress with its BHR investment fund with the Chinese government. The Chinese government media ran several stories about Biden's Ukrainian venture. The main Chinese government news outlet China Daily noted, quote, the decision immediately sparked speculation over whether the U.S. government had a role in Hunter Biden's promotion, as his father has frequently spoken about the need to increase Ukraine's energy independence, end quote. Another ally of Secretary of State Kerry was soon added to the Burisma payroll. Less than a month after Kerry's protege Archer joined the board, Burisma hired a new lobbyist in Washington named David Leader, a former Senate chief of staff for Kerry. Burisma's access to the corridors of power halfway around the world in Washington was looking bright. At the end of June, 4 U.S. Senators Markey, Shaheen, Wyden, and Murphy drafted a letter to President Obama requesting greater U.S. aid for the Ukrainian energy industry. In a statement, Burisma immediately applauded the range of U.S. legislative support for development of Ukraine's board broad and untapped resources, and an increase in transparency and good governance. In 2016, Burisma organized and co-sponsored Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko's meeting with top U.S. lawmakers in Washington. In an event in the Congressional Auditorium at the U.S. Capitol Visitor Center, Devon Archer joined Poroshenko and members of Congress and the U.S. Senate to discuss Ukrainian issues. The choice of Hunter Biden to handle transparency and corporate governance for Burisma is curious, because Biden had little, if any, experience in Ukrainian law or professional legal counsel, period. He seemed undeterred by the fact that as he was joining the Burisma board, the British government's Serious Fraud Office, SFO, was seizing $23 million from Zlotowski's bank accounts. The SFO was also seeking access to his Swiss bank accounts and the company's account at BNP Paribas in London. British officials aggressively pursued the case for more than a year, but ran into a roadblock when Ukrainian prosecutors refused to cooperate in the investigation. By January 2015, the SFO had blocked the accounts. Doing business in the Ukraine is not for the faint of heart. According to the World Economic Forum, Ukraine is one of the most corrupt places in the world. Out of 148 nations studied, it ranks 122nd for, quote, division of public funds, end quote, 143rd for property rights, 130 for, quote, irregular payments and bribes, end quote, 133rd for favoritism in decisions of government officials, i.e. cronyism, and 146th for protection of minority shareholders' interests. This is out of 148 nations. As one Reuters writer put it, quote, corruption in Ukraine is so bad, a Nigerian prince would be embarrassed, end quote. Indeed, Ukraine was rated as more corrupt than Nigeria by Transparency International. But even in such a corrupt climate, Burisma seems to stand out. Biden and Archer were joining one of the most corrupt firms in a very corrupt country. 1 year after Hunter Biden joined the firm to offer help on compliance and legal matters, experienced industry observers warned investors that Burisma was still a company to be avoided. Quote, anyone considering investing in Ukrainian gas or this influential player, Burisma, should understand that the next stop for their money will be Switzerland, end quote, declared one industry publication. It went on, quote, Burisma, registered in Cyprus in 2006, fails to pass the most basic due diligence check. Its registration documents are impossible to run down. It publishes no asset information or financial records, nor does it release any audited financial statements. The complete lack of transparency means that anyone interested, including potential investors, must rely solely on press releases about Burisma's future plans and intentions, end quote. It was hardly what you would call a ringing endorsement. Yaroslav Yudovenko, managing director of the investment firm Empire State Capital Partners in Kiev, says there is a very short list of legitimate gas companies in Ukraine. Quote, Burisma isn't on it, end quote. Despite the persistent legal questions swirling around Burisma, Archer and Hunter Biden carried the flag around the globe, serving to legitimize the activities of the company. Devon Archer represented Burisma at the Louisiana Gulf Coast Oil Exposition in late 2015. Hunter Biden attended and addressed the Energy Security for the Future conference in Monaco. Sponsored by Prince Albert II of Monaco, Biden joined him on stage along with former Vice Chancellor of Germany, Joschka Fischer. How much were Biden and Archer paid by Burisma? There is no way of knowing. They are not required to disclose their compensation. One can only imagine that lending one's name to a suspect company would require a large sum. Given the large sums businesses pay for advertising, public relations, and marketing, One wonders how much Burisma would invest in gaining credibility by appointing two very politically connected Americans to their board. So, an aside real quick, guys, this whole book by Schweitzer called Secret Empires is all about what's called princeling deals. I'll make a list of names and mention of the Democrat, Republican names that he more than details about this shady, corrupt business. So basically what a princeling deal is, we have anti-corruption laws that prohibit U.S. politicians from taking direct payments, bribes, gifts, vacation, nothing from foreign companies and foreign governments. However, they circumvent this and completely skirt around this by having their friends and their family members be appointed on foreign company boards and given gifts and lavish payments by corrupt foreign countries. Because for some odd reason, in our law, we have absolutely no law against the family members or friends of our U.S. politicians taking all of these bribes and all of this stuff from foreign influence. Why that is, I'd love to know. But that's basically what a princeling deal is, and that's what this book is all about. Back to chapter 4. Professor Oliver Boyd Barrett, who has written about Ukraine, estimated that the deal with Burisma could be enormous. Quote, potentially, he wrote, the Biden family could become billionaires. While we cannot trace the sums of money going to Hunter Biden and Devon Archer, we can map the funds and benefits flowing to Burisma's owners at the direction of Hunter Biden's father, Vice President Joe Biden, and Devon Archer's confidant, Secretary of State John Kerry. The transactions raise questions not only because of their timing, but also the large sums of money involved. Recall that controversial oligarch and Burisma owner Kolomoisky had been barred entrance into the United States because of legal concerns about his activities in Ukraine. But in 2015, after Biden and Archer joined the board, that changed. With the intervention of the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, he was given admittance back into the United States. There was the disappearance of $1.8 billion in U.S. taxpayer guaranteed money. That's money they stole from us, by the way. Both Joe Biden and John Kerry championed $1.8 billion in taxpayer-backed loans to be given to Ukraine courtesy of the IMF. The funds were being loaned to the country to keep the country's financial markets liquid. Much of that money would go through Kolomoisky's Privat Bank, and more than $1 billion from Privat just simply disappeared. Where did that money go? We can only follow the egress of this large sum of money into offshore private accounts thanks to investigative work done by Ukrainian anti-corruption watchdog group called Nashi Groshi, quote-unquote, our money. Nashi Groshi mapped the complex flow of money by researching a series of court judgments of the Economic Court of the Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk region, where Kolomoisky was governor until he left the country. It worked like this, the watchdog group says, quote, 42 Ukrainian firms owned by 54 offshore entities registered in Caribbean, American, and Cypriot jurisdictions, that's in Cyprus, and linked to or affiliated with the Privat group of companies, took out loans from Privat Bank in Ukraine to the value of $1.8 billion. The firms then ordered goods from 6 foreign suppliers, companies, 3 of which were incorporated in the United Kingdom, 2 in the British Virgin Islands, and 1 in the Caribbean statelet of St. Kitts and Nevis. Payment for the orders, $1.8 billion, was shortly afterwards prepaid into vendors' accounts, which were coincidentally in the Cyprus branch of Privat Bank. Once the money was sent, the Ukrainian importing companies arranged with Privat Bank, Ukraine, that their loans be guaranteed by the goods on order, end quote. Of course, it was all a scam, and the complex corporate structure a decoy screen. No quote-unquote supplier companies provided any goods. The $1.8 billion effectively disappeared from Pravat, laundered through a network of offshore entities. This transaction of $1.8 billion with the help of fake contracts was simply an asset siphoning operation, end quote, the Watchdog Group explained. By 2016, Ukrainian authorities were forced to nationalize Kolomoisky's Pravat Bank when it was discovered that the bank was collecting savings from Ukrainians and then engaging in quote-unquote massive insider lending, whereby mysterious front corporations were taking large loans and then not paying them back. Huge sums of money had simply disappeared, and the Ukrainian government, supported by taxpayer dollars from the West, was forced to take ownership of the bank to make sure customers did not lose their money. One Ukrainian lawmaker called it the, quote, greatest robbery of Ukraine's state budget of the millennium, end quote. When money disappears, the people who lent that money want answers. Apparently that's not the case when it comes to the $2.3 trillion missing dollars from the DoD spreadsheets, if you guys have never seen it. Just on the eve of 9/11, as Donald Rumsfeld was being grilled on the floor of the Senate after Bush nominated him to be the Secretary of Defense, one of the senators asked him what he planned on doing about the $2.3 trillion missing from the Department of Defense budget sheets. He leaned into the microphone with a smirk on his face and snidely replied, "Decline the nomination," to which the entire room erupted in laughter. I'm glad our political elite in Washington and the leaders of this country find it hilarious and laughable, the fact that that much taxpayer money just up and disappeared and nobody did anything about it or was held to account about it. But anyway, I digress. Back to Schweitzer's book. And so, at the behest of angry officials in the United States and the West, an investigation was launched. Burisma Company founder Mykola Zlochevsky, the stocky former environmental minister, worked deftly to avoid criminal charges. In February of 2016, Ukrainian authorities seized his property on suspicion that he had engaged in quote-unquote illicit enrichment. Zlochevsky fled the country and was placed on Ukraine's wanted list. The Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office actually seized Burisma's gas wells. Tax authorities began investigating him for suspicion of tax evasion. But then, almost as quickly as the investigation into Zlochevsky and Burisma was launched, it was halted. On January 16, 2017, Air Force Two was descending on Boryspil Airport, just south of Ukraine's capital. This would be Joe Biden's last foreign trip before leaving office. It was cold and dark. Dressed in an overcoat, he descended the stairs quickly and was met by a delegation from the foreign ministry on the tarmac. This was his Ukrainian swan song, as Reuters put it. Quote, a farewell visit by one of Ukraine's strongest political supporters, end quote. The Obama administration, under Biden's direction, had poured some $3 billion into the country. Later that evening, he met with the Prime Minister of Ukraine and then a late evening meeting with his friend Petro Poroshenko, the Ukrainian president. As the Kiev Post reported, that latter meeting was to be behind closed doors, and details of most of their discussion won't be made public, end quote. 4 days before Biden arrived, Burisma made a dramatic announcement. The Ukrainian criminal investigations into the company and its founder had been ended by Ukrainian government prosecutors. Quote, since all legal proceedings against Burisma Group are closed, end quote, the company announced, it will allow us to increase production volumes and the flow of foreign investments in Ukraine, considering attracting international companies in the country, fulfill social and investment responsibilities, and well as duly pay in full all required tax liabilities in the budget. This is a big step forward for Ukraine in general and Burisma Group in particular, end quote. Joe Biden met with Ukrainian President Poroshenko and was warmly greeted by Ukrainian officials who saw him as their strongest advocate in the West. Biden urged the United States and the West to stand behind the Ukrainian government. Quote, the international community must continue to stand as one against Russian coercion and aggression, end quote, he told reporters, standing beside Poroshenko. Despite the enormous evidence of corruption and criminal activity involving Burisma, Devon Archer remained involved with the company through the end of 2016, while Hunter Biden, as of this writing, still serves a member of the board and provides legal assistance. They have never disclosed their compensation, because they don't have to. And the more than $1 billion that disappeared from their business partner's bank has never been recovered. The Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota is a world away from the Ukraine, but the story here helps put Archer's global activity and Rosemont Seneca's methods in context. Indeed it does. Home to one of the poorest Native American tribes in the United States, this will really get you hot under the collar, the Oglala Sioux, it has struggled over the years to attract investment and business opportunities for tribal members. Beginning in 2014, the tribe was fleeced courtesy of a complex, fraudulent scheme involving a known con artist, a man once proclaimed, quote, porn's new king, end quote, and Carrie confidant and Rosemont Seneca partner Devon Archer. It was an audacious scheme, and for more than 2 years, Archer worked with a handful of other individuals to extract more than $60 million in bond money from the tribe. Proceeds that were supposed to go to the tribe ended up being used to purchase luxury goods and line the coffers of the scammers. Caught up in the scheme was a company called Burnham Asset Management. Hunter Biden served as the vice chairman of the company. Devon Archer sat on the board of directors. Millions would flow through an entity run by Archer called Rosemont Seneca Bohai. It would end with the May 2016 arrest of Devon Archer by federal agents. In March of 2014, however, a large man with a long record of fraudulent financial schemes ventured to Las Vegas, Nevada to attend the National Reservation Economic Summit, RES. It was an economic development conference for Indian reservations from across the country. John Galanis, with a heft of nearly 400 pounds, had been behind the pump and dump stock deal involving the quote-unquote Hair Extension Center and a real estate deal in which he bilked Eddie Murphy and Sammy Davis Jr. out of money. In 1988, he was sentenced to 27 years in prison for tax shelter fraud. In 2000, Forbes magazine called him, quote, one of the biggest white-collar criminals of recent decades, end quote. So this dude was a real sleazebag. His son, Jason, who is the character involved in this story, his son, Jason, was reportedly involved in investment schemes of his own. In 2003, he was dubbed, quote, porn's new king, end quote, for his early online porn payment processing site. According to Forbes magazine, while in jail, John was directing Jason's financial activities and was calling his son collect 30 times a day to discuss business matters. In Vegas, the Galanizes, however you pronounce it, sat down with the leaders of the Wakpani Lake Community Corporation, a tribally chartered economic development corporation owned by the Oglala Sioux. They suggested that the tribe issue bonds to raise capital for economic projects. Tribal leaders were eager to invest in a winery, among other ventures. With a deal in the making, Jason reached out to Devon Archer and another finance guy, Bevan Cooney, to offer them a part of it. On April 4th, 2014, Jason wrote them an email with the subject line, quote, Oglala Native Spirits Memo Docs, Doc X, end quote. The body of the email said, quote, 20 million bond approved, proceeds are 15 million to us and 5 million to them for a winery investment they want to make, end quote. Devon Archer and his association with Biden and Kerry would prove to be an attractive, legitimizing factor for the Galaneses' activities. Jason Galanis sought investors, he would email promotional materials to use when appropriate to demonstrate who your financial sponsors are. Under leadership, the first name to appear was Devon Archer, managing partner of Rosemont Group, a $2.4 billion private equity firm co-owned by Hunter Biden and Christopher Hines. It went on to note that he was vice chairman and an investment committee member of Bohai Harvest RST. In August, the first bond issuance worth $27 million was released. Less than 2 months later, on October 1st, a second bond issuance of $15 million took place. Who bought these bonds? Or who bought those bonds? According to the SCE, the proceeds were diverted from the first bond sale to buy into the second using Rosemont Seneca Bohai LLC to do it. Around August 15, 2014, Jason Galanis, whose nickname was Greek, sent another email to Archer and Cooney about the legal execution of the bond sale. Quote, "This is pure genius a la sick. Mikey Milken!" End quote. Wrote back Cooney. Quote, "The Native American bonds! Great work here, Greek!" End quote. On September 24th, 2014, $15 million was transferred into the Rosemont Seneca Bohai brokerage account in New York from an entity called Thorsdale, but the money did not stay there long. On October 1st, Rosemont Seneca Bohai LLC purchased the entirety of the second tribal bond issuance for $15 million. When a brokerage firm associated with the deal asked where the $15 million had come from, the government alleges that Archer lied and said, quote, "The funds used to purchase the bonds were from real estate sales through my business, Rosemont Seneca Bohai LLC," end quote. But of course that was not true. The funds had been misappropriated from the first tribal bond issuance. A little more than 6 months later, on April 9th, 2015, Rosemont Seneca Bohai LLC transferred those $15 million in tribal bonds into an obscure brokerage account in Bermuda called VL Assurance. As U.S. prosecutors would point out, quote, "Rosemont did not receive anything of economic substance, such as an equity interest in VL Assurance Bermuda Ltd., in exchange for this transfer," end quote. According to federal investigators and prosecutors, the proceeds of these bond sales were misappropriated and went into various projects. Money that was supposed to go to the tribe ended up being used for the benefit of Jason Galanis and Devon Archer. Some of the proceeds went into a legal defense fund for John Galanis and Jason Galanis, who had legal bills related to another financial scheme. Some went to luxury items. The Galanises poured tribal bond money into purchasing high-priced items in Prada, Gucci, Valentino, among others. Other money ended up in Devon Archer's pockets, including over $700,000. Some ended up in the accounts of Rosemont Seneca Bohai. Some of that money may have found its way to another Rosemont entity. Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners, which listed Hunter Biden as an advisor and Chris Hines as an investor, created a joint venture with the state of Hawaii called Embloom to incubate high-tech companies in the islands. On May 19, 2015, a small high-tech company called Code Rebel had an IPO on the NASDAQ stock market. The company was headed by Arben Kriesnu, a Kosovo-born German citizen who was running Embloom. As alleged by the SCE, Jason Galanis and the two others used tribal bond proceeds to buy up to 87% of the stock on that day, driving up the stock from its $5 offering price to $15 a share. Buying the remaining shares were Devon Archer and a few other investors. The scheme began to unravel when tribal leaders wondered where the money was going. Yeah, I would too. Federal authorities launched an investigation, and on May 11th, 2016, Devon Archer and others involved in the scheme were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit securities fraud. They had also used pension funds to buy the bonds and quickly faced civil cases as well. The pension fund for workers at Michelin, the tire company, sued Archer and others in court, alleging that the defendants had, quote, raided the proceeds from closing the bonds in order to create a slush fund that would pay certain defendants directly and indirectly to support their lifestyles, legal fees, and speculative ventures, end quote. According to the criminal complaint, $700,513 ended up going to Archer via the Rosemont Seneca Bohai LLC account. Both the criminal charges and the civil lawsuits named Devon Archer, but no one else connected with Rosemont Seneca. Did Archer go rogue? While there is no direct evidence that Hunter Biden or Chris Hines knew of the tribal bond scheme, the corporate structure of their business together suggests that they could have and maybe should have known. In the criminal complaint, prosecutors noted that Archer was the founder of Rosemont Capital LLC and was connected with Burnham Asset Management. Hunter Biden's name was not mentioned. The business that was used to transfer the money was Rosemont Seneca Bohai, according to legal records in New York. Rosemont Seneca Bohai uses the same business address as other Rosemont entities involving both Biden and Hines. It is also interesting to note that Rosemont Seneca Bohai LLC is also listed as a shareholder on the Bohai Harvest RST deal in China. There were large sums of money, sometimes $15 million, passing through the Rosemont Seneca Bohai accounts. Hunter Biden was a partner in Rosemont Seneca. He was also the vice chairman of Burnham. Did he not notice? Devon Archer was arrested in May 2016 for his alleged role in the tribal bond scam. The Ukrainian news agency story said it all. Quote, Burisma Holdings board director Archer arrested, end quote, blared the headline. As of this writing, he is awaiting trial. Jason Galanis has been sentenced to 14 years for his involvement in the scam. Following Archer's arrest, his name was removed from the Burisma board. Hunter Biden remains on the board and as an advisor to Burisma. The environs of the White House are not the only place you will find American princelings. They also roam the highest levels of Capitol Hill. Thus endeth chapter 4 of Peter Schweitzer's book, Secret Empires. I highly, highly, highly recommend this read. It's one of at least half a dozen books that I have consumed over the last 6 years or so that really was an eye-opening experience of what the reality is going on with our political leadership and the underbelly, under the carpet, creepy crawlies of our government. I would also recommend The Killing of Uncle Sam, The Secret Terrorists, Merchants of Despair. Supreme Power is a good one by Ted Stewart if you want to get up to speed on how they completely took the justice system and corrupted our entire Supreme Court process. But basically, guys, this book is all about princeling deals and about how American politicians have been stealing your money and then using it to enrich themselves by doing political favors via friends and family at the behest of foreign governments and foreign companies. And this book details left and right. Some of the nefarious characters that Schweitzer goes into is Trent Lott, who's a Republican, Bob Livingston, Republican, Speaker Dennis Hastert, William Jefferson Clinton, Democrat, Loretta Sanchez, Democrat, Kurt Weldon, Republican, Orrin Hatch, Republican, Joe Biden, Democrat, Mitch McConnell, Republican, and his wife, Elaine Chao, who is the daughter, if I'm not mistaken, and my memory recalls from reading this book, she is politically connected as being the daughter of one of the families that's probably the most powerful, wealthiest Chinese family connected to the CCP. John Kerry, Democrat. Bill Schuster. Dick Durbin, Democrat. Patrick Leahy, Democrat. Chicago Mayor Daley, Democrat. President George W. Bush, Republican. President Obama, Democrat, and on and on and on. Tom Daschle, Democrat. These are just some of the people that this guy in his tremendous research shows and proves that they belong either in jail or at the end of a rope, because they are completely corrupt, scandalous, evil, unethical, immoral little turds. I won't go into too much more detail than that, because this was supposed to just be an audio of chapter 4, but obviously it's bringing back a lot of memories from reading this entire book, which was just infuriating. But I highly recommend it to get yourself up to speed if you haven't read it and have an interest in finding out some of the more dirty details of what some of these characters of the names I read off, of how they've been at it for a long time, and none of it has been beneficial for our country, our people, our society, our economy, and definitely not the ethical health or morality of our government, which at this point is quite laughable. But anyway, I just thought that some of that information tying to Burisma in the Ukraine and Biden's dealings with it is pretty pertinent now these days, considering what is going on with all the squawking of Ukraine in the news, given the fact that the vice president of yesteryear then, when I read this book in 2018, is now sitting in the Oval Office. So anyway, there it is. I didn't mean for this to run so long, but take care, guys.